stole my login to get into my files, I'd already swapped them with fake data that would wreck his career. Now, he's about to present it to the CEO while I'm sitting in the front row waiting for it to explode. I'm Jerry Pierce, 47, and I work as a senior risk analyst at Northpoint Analytics here in Cincinnati. Been there 20 years, through 3 recessions and more corporate reorganizations than I care to count. I keep strict hours because I'm a single dad fighting for permanent custody of my 12-year-old son, Casey. When you're divorced and the court's watching your every move, you don't get to mess around with your schedule. This whole thing started when Lance Hoffman showed up as our new strategic director. Fresh MBA from Northwestern, expensive suits, and that kind of confidence that comes from never actually failing at anything important. He had this habit of leaning on people's cubicle walls when he talked to you, like he owned the place. Which, considering his connections to upper management, maybe he did. First time I knew something was wrong, I was sitting in a conference room watching Lance present my quarterly compliance analysis to the executive team, word for word. My slides, my recommendations, my 18 months of work on regulatory trend prediction. He'd asked to review it the week before, said he wanted to add some strategic context before taking it to leadership. I'd send it over without thinking twice. We're supposed to be on the same team, right? 2 days later, there I was watching him take full credit. When the CFO asked about the methodology behind one of my projections, Lance just smiled and said, "Let's not get bogged down in the technical details. The important thing is the strategic direction." Translation: I have no idea how any of this actually works. The meeting ended with handshakes all around. Lance got pats on the back and comments about strong analytical thinking. I got nothing. Not even eye contact. I walked back to my desk thinking maybe it was a miscommunication. Maybe he forgot to mention my name. Happens, right? Wrong. Let me give you some background on where I work. Northpoint Analytics does compliance consulting for financial firms and energy companies. Every file access gets logged automatically. Every email gets archived. When your clients can get fined millions for bad projections, the audit trail is everything. Using someone else's credentials isn't just against policy, it's a career-ending move that can trigger federal investigations. My official title is Senior Risk Assessment Specialist. What that means in real terms is I build the models that keep our clients out of regulatory trouble. Variance calculations, trend analysis, compliance forecasting. When I'm right, which I am 94% of the time, executives buy boats and forget my name. When I'm wrong, people get fired and companies get investigated. I badge in at 7:15 every morning. Not 7 to 20, not 7:10, 7:15. Because Casey's school opens at 7:05, and the drive takes exactly 8 minutes if I hit the lights right. My ex-wife is just waiting for me to slip up on something, anything, that she can take back to family court. Miss one pickup, show up late to a school event, and suddenly I'm the unreliable father who can't handle full custody. Before I left for work that morning, Casey was sitting at our kitchen table eating cereal and working on math homework he'd forgotten about fractions. I showed him how to find common denominators, how to line everything up so it made sense. "It's all about the foundation, buddy," I told him. "Get that right, and the rest follows." He nodded, pencil moving across the paper in careful, deliberate strokes. Kid's methodical like his old man. My desk sits in the corner of the 14th floor next to a server room that hums constantly at 42 hertz. New people request transfers within a month. I've been here 6 years in this spot. You get used to it. 3 monitors, legal pad for tracking anomalies, no personal photos. Family court loves stability, but it also doesn't like seeing your personal life spread across an office where anyone can photograph it and submit it as evidence. Patricia Morgan runs our division, former federal auditor who climbed the ladder by being smarter and tougher than everyone in her way. She respects results and hates excuses. We've had maybe 20 conversations in 3 years, most of them her telling me to fix something someone else broke. No small talk, just tasks. I handled every single one. Then Lance showed up and everything changed. Guy figured out the game fast. I was the one who built the models that made quarterly reports look good. I was the one who worked weekends without being asked. I was the one who could explain complex statistical frameworks in emails that executives could forward to clients without embarrassment. And I was the guy nobody really noticed because I didn't play golf with the VP or spend lunch networking at the country club. Useful and invisible. To someone like Lance, that wasn't a problem, it was an opportunity. After that first presentation theft, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I opened a folder on my home computer and started saving everything. Slack timestamps, email chains, file version histories showing who created what and when. Not because I had some master plan, but because 3 years of family court taught me that documentation is the only thing that matters when it's your word against someone else's. The judge in my custody case had made it clear from day one, show me facts, not feelings, time-stamped evidence, not sob stories, so that's what I did with Lance. Every interaction, every stolen presentation, every forwarded email where he took credit for my work, I documented it all. Second time Lance presented my work, I was ready. He'd asked for my quarterly risk assessment, said he needed it for a board review. Sent me a Slack at 4:45 on a Thursday. Hey Jerry, can you shoot me that Q2 analysis? Want to add some executive perspective before the leadership meeting. I sent it at 5:02, right before I had to leave for pickup. Casey had soccer practice that evening, and missing it wasn't an option. The divorce decree was specific about maintaining consistency in his activities. One missed practice could become evidence that I prioritized work over parenting. 3 days later, Monday morning leadership meeting. I wasn't invited originally, but someone dropped out and they needed a body in the room for quorum. I sat in the back corner, same spot I always took when forced into these things. Lance stood up front with the remote in his hand, clicked to my slides, my formatting, my executive summary. Spent 12 minutes explaining my risk framework like he'd invented it. Used phrases like what I discovered during my analysis and based on my research into compliance trends. At one point, he made a recommendation that directly contradicted something I'd explicitly warned against in my original notes. Notes he'd apparently deleted before presenting. Nobody questioned it. They just nodded and took notes and told Lance it was solid work. After that meeting, I started a new routine. Every evening after helping Casey with homework, after he went to bed, I'd sit at my kitchen table with my laptop and document everything Lance had done that day. What files he'd requested, which emails he'd forwarded, how he'd presented my work in meetings I wasn't invited to. The pattern became clear fast. Lance would request materials Tuesday, present them Thursday, take full credit Friday, always the same timeline, always the same approach, claim he needed strategic context or executive perspective, then strip out my name and present everything as his own analysis. Third incident happened 2 weeks later. Lance needed my regulatory trend analysis for a client meeting, said it was urgent, needed it by end of day. I sent it over at 4:30. Next morning, I got an email from the client thanking Lance and his team for the excellent insights. My 6 months of trend analysis had become Lance's overnight strategic brilliance. Fourth incident, fifth, sixth, always the same. He'd show up at my desk around 3 p.m., lean against my cubicle wall with that casual confidence, make small talk about weekend plans or the weather, then casually mention he needed something for a meeting. Made it sound collaborative, like we were partners working toward the same goal. Jerry, got a minute? Could use your input on something? Then he'd explain how he was presenting to leadership or clients, how my technical expertise could really help sell the strategic vision. Always framed it like he was doing me a favor by including my work in high-level presentations. I'd send whatever he needed, always marked it as preliminary or draft. Always included caveats about final review. Didn't matter. By the time Lance presented it, all the warnings were gone, all the attribution was gone, and somehow my careful analysis had become his strategic genius. By month 3, I'd logged 16 separate incidents. Everything saved, time-stamped, backed up to an encrypted drive at home, each file labeled by date and project. Email chains showing his requests. Calendar entries showing when presentations happened. File version histories proving who created what and when. Casey asked me one evening why I was working so much after dinner. We were sitting at the kitchen table, him with his science homework, me with my laptop documenting Lance's latest theft. Just keeping track of things at work, buddy. I told him, sometimes you have to be careful about important stuff, like how Mom keeps all my report cards and certificates in that folder, exactly like that. He nodded and went back to his homework. Kid understood. When you're fighting for something important, you keep records. Lance started getting invited to leadership dinners. Got promoted to senior director while I stayed at the same level. His name went on the high potential list for VP track. Meanwhile, my performance review called me reliable and consistent. Corporate code for this person will never get promoted, but we won't fire them either. The breaking point came during our Q2 review. Big conference room, executive floor. The kind with windows and coffee that doesn't taste like motor oil. Patricia pulled up our division's accuracy metrics. 94% hit rate on compliance forecasts over 2 years. Best in the company. She looked around the room and said, "Lance, your team has done excellent work here. Walk us through the methodology driving these results." Your team. Like Lance had a team. Like anyone besides me had touched these models in 18 months. Lance stood up, smoothed his tie, and spent 5 minutes explaining work I'd done entirely alone. Talked about our approach and the framework we developed. Used "we" about 40 times. At one point, he made eye contact with me and smiled. Not a thank you smile, a testing smile. The kind that says, "I'm checking if you're going to say anything, and we both know you won't." I didn't. After the meeting, the VP stopped Lance in the hallway. I was maybe 10 feet away, heading back to my desk. He clapped Lance on the shoulder, called him a rising star. Said the board had been asking about him, that there were big opportunities ahead for people who deliver results like this. They were standing right there. Neither of them looked my way once. That night, I sat in Casey's room after he fell asleep, watching him breathe in the dim light from the hallway. 3 years of custody battles. 3 years of proving I could provide stability. 3 years of documentation and careful schedules and never missing a pickup. Also, this kid could have the security he deserved. Lance was threatening that security, not directly, but his games were affecting my performance reviews, my promotion opportunities, my long-term earning potential. In family court, financial stability matters. A lot. Lance started scheduling late meetings after that. Quick syncs at 5:30, 6 so, sometimes later. Said it showed commitment. That this was when real work gets done after the distractions clear out. My calendar has a standing appointment at 5:10 that I don't negotiate. Not with directors, not with VPs, not with anyone. Because if I miss pickup at Casey's after-school program, it's not just "sorry, work ran late." It's a documented incident. It's a phone call to a caseworker. It's evidence that maybe I'm not as stable as I claim to be. First couple times Lance scheduled evening meetings, I explained I had a hard stop at 5:10. Didn't elaborate, just said it wasn't flexible. Third time I declined, he made a comment in front of Patricia. We were at the coffee station middle of the afternoon. Patricia was getting her second cup. Lance walked up, smiled at both of us, and said, "Jerry, I know you've got bandwidth issues with evening meetings, but we really need all hands for this priority project. Team effort, bandwidth issues, like I was overbooked, like I was the problem." I smiled, said I'd review all materials first thing in the morning, kept my voice even and professional. The caseworker had warned me during our last check-in, any hint that work was interfering with parental responsibilities, and the judge would hear about it. 4 months in, something happened that changed everything. The Wellington Group account. Major client, $4.2 million annual contract. They'd hired us 2 years ago to build predictive models for regulatory compliance in the energy sector. I'd built that system, spent 8 months learning their data, understanding how federal agencies telegraph policy changes. The models worked. Over 24 months, Wellington's compliance penalty exposure dropped 68%. They'd avoided 3 major enforcement actions that hammered their competitors. Their board specifically cited our work in investor presentations. Patricia assigned Lance to lead the annual review presentation. Made sense from her perspective. He was the director, he had the title, he'd been getting all the credit anyway. What she didn't know was that Lance had never looked at the actual code, never asked about methodology, never spent 5 minutes trying to understand how the models generated predictions. 2 weeks before the presentation, Lance stopped by my desk, same casual lean against my cubicle wall. "Hey Jerry, quick favor. Think you could pull together some materials for the Wellington meeting? I've been slammed with strategic planning and could use support on technical details." I stopped typing, looked up at him. He was already checking his phone, barely paying attention to the conversation he'd started. I asked him a basic question about the regression model we used for Wellington's Q1 forecast, entry-level stuff. Any analyst who'd spent 30 minutes with the project could answer without thinking. What weighting did we use for historical variance versus current trend data? He blinked, shifted his weight. "Let's not get bogged down in specifics, Jerry. Big picture is what they care about." I told him I'd put something together. He nodded, clapped me on the shoulder. First time he'd ever touched me, and walked off to take a call. That night, I sat in my apartment with Casey doing homework at the kitchen table, and I thought about what happens when you give someone enough rope. Lance had no backup plan, no exit strategy, no contingency for what would happen if the supply line got disrupted. He'd built his entire reputation on the assumption that I'd keep quietly feeding him work while he took credit. Casey looked up from his math worksheet. Dad, you're staring at your computer, but you're not typing anything, just thinking through a problem at work, buddy. Is it like when I can't figure out a word problem? Mom always says to read it again and look for what's really being asked. Smart kid, what was really being asked here wasn't help with a presentation. It was continued enablement of theft. Lance wasn't asking for collaboration, he was demanding submission. From his perspective, he'd found a machine that kept running as long as nobody looked under the hood. But machines break down when you change the input. I decided to find out what would happen if I modified the input just slightly. Setting the trap was easier than you'd think. Predictive models are complicated, dozens of variables interacting, multiple data sources that have to align, layered assumptions building on each other. If you understand the architecture, you can explain it under pressure. If you don't, you're reading words off slides and praying nobody asks follow-up questions. I built 2 versions of the Wellington presentation. The real one stayed in my personal workspace, a drive Lance didn't know existed. Clean analysis, accurate projections, professional formatting, everything Wellington expected from a firm they paid $4.2 million annually. The draft version went into the shared folder Lance had created 3 months earlier. He'd sent a company-wide email about collaborative workflows and breaking down information silos. What it really meant was he wanted access to everyone's files without asking permission. The draft looked almost identical to the real one. Same layout, same branding, same executive summary structure. Someone skimming at 11 p.m. after a long day wouldn't notice anything wrong. The slides looked right, the language sounded professional. But I changed the numbers. Not obviously. I made them subtly wrong. Confidence intervals that didn't match the methodology. Variance calculations that contradicted the data sources shown 3 slides earlier. Projections that looked professional but would fall apart the second anyone who understood statistics asked a basic question. I buried a line in the speaker notes on slide 4, draft v2.1 minus internal review only, not for client distribution. Then I labeled every file in that folder with clear warnings. Preliminary draft, not client ready in the document properties. Working copy, do not distribute in the file names. Enough documentation that anyone who actually looked would know these weren't final products. I sent Lance an email at 4:47 on Thursday. Right before I left for pickup, shared folder contains preliminary drafts only. Final client-ready version will be delivered directly once sign-off is complete. I screenshot that email and saved it 3 places. Then I went home to help Casey with his fraction homework, showing him again how everything has to line up properly for the math to work. 7 days before the Wellington presentation, the audit logs showed someone using my credentials at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. I don't work at 11:43 p.m. I'm home making dinner or helping Casey with homework. Definitely not logged into the North Point network. But someone was. Accessed the shared folder. Downloaded the entire structure in one batch operation minus 52 files, 2.8 gigabytes of data. Didn't open a single document to review contents. Didn't check file properties. Just grabbed everything and logged off at 11:47 4 minutes. That's how long it took Lance to hang himself. 2 days later, Lance scheduled a quick sync with me, 20 minutes in a small conference room. He wanted to align on narrative and make sure we were telling the same story to the client. What he actually wanted was for me to walk him through the slides so he'd know what to say when executives asked questions. I showed up 5 minutes late, sat down across from him. He had his laptop open, the draft presentation already on screen. Started talking about key messaging and strategic framing. I interrupted. Which version are you planning to use? He looked confused. The one you sent me. The one in the shared folder. I reviewed it thoroughly over the weekend. Looks solid. I nodded slowly. Those are preliminary drafts. File names clearly indicate they're not client-ready. I have updated versions with corrected confidence intervals and verified data sources. His jaw tightened for half a second. Then the smile came back. Jerry, buddy, I appreciate the attention to detail. Really, that's what makes you valuable. But I've already reviewed everything thoroughly. Spent 4 hours with it. The numbers look fine. Client cares about big-picture strategy, not decimal points. Buddy, 20 years at this company, he'd never called me anything but my name. I didn't argue, just shrugged and said something about wanting to double-check data sources. He waved it off, closed his laptop, stood up. This is going to be a home run, Jerry. You should celebrate after whole team. The whole team, like there was a team. The next week, I'd walk past conference rooms and see Lance rehearsing alone, practicing gestures in front of mirrors, looking confident and completely unprepared. The morning of the presentation, I grabbed my legal pad and walked to the executive conference room on the 18th floor, the one where careers get made or destroyed. 18 seats, 16 people showed up. Patricia at the head near the door, CFO to her right with a legal pad and the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Jennifer Wells, Wellington's VP of Compliance, and Todd Nash, their strategy chief, sat across from the screen with matching looks of professional skepticism. They'd brought their outside consultant too. Gray suit, no small talk, just opened a laptop and waited. I took a seat near the back corner. Lance opened strong, firm handshakes, smooth introduction, hit all the buzzwords, predictive excellence, data-driven insights, strategic alignment. First 2 slides were safe territory. Slide 3 introduced methodology. This was where it got real. Lance started reading bullet points, talked about multivariable regression frameworks and compliance trend mapping like he'd invented the concepts. The consultant raised his hand. Calm, surgical. How does the model weight quarterly variance against baseline regulatory assumptions? 2 seconds of silence that felt like an hour. Great question. Let's not get stuck in technical weeds. The important thing is output, which speaks for itself. Jennifer leaned forward. Could we see the data source documentation for these variance calculations? Lance looked at his laptop, scrolled through files. His smile had tightened. Documentation is being finalized. I'll send it after the meeting. The CFO set his pen down deliberately. That's when I knew the temperature had shifted. Slide 4 made everything worse. The consultant typed something, then asked why confidence intervals were narrower than historical variance suggested. Basic question, valid concern. Lance stared at the slide like it had betrayed him. Could you clarify that? The intervals don't match the data range from slide 3. Variance should be significantly higher based on methodology you described. Either intervals are wrong or methodology is wrong. Lance looked at me for the first time since sitting down. Quick glance like a drowning man scanning for a lifeguard. I kept my face neutral. He turned back to the screen, started saying something about preliminary calculations and ongoing refinements. Jennifer cut him off. These aren't preliminary, this is the presentation. Todd leaned forward. Walk us through the regression model step by step. The next 4 minutes were the longest of Lance's career. He clicked through slides he clearly hadn't reviewed, stumbled over terminology he didn't understand, made claims that contradicted data visible on screen. At one point, he admitted he wasn't sure which data source fed the primary projection. Todd stopped taking notes. The consultant was typing on his phone. Patricia's face had gone from neutral to stone cold. The CFO raised his hand. Stop. Lance stopped. Room went silent except for the projector humming. Who built this model? The question hung in the air. Lance's mouth opened, closed. Then he made the move I'd been waiting for. Jerry handled the technical build. He's our senior analyst on this account. Every head turned. 16 pairs of eyes landed on my corner seat. I opened my laptop, pulled up version history, access logs, found the file with the watermark. Those files are labeled preliminary drafts, not client ready. Lance accessed them from shared folder at 11:43 p.m. last Tuesday without requesting final version. Watermark in speaker notes confirms he's presenting the draft I flagged as incomplete. Patricia's eyes narrowed. The CFO pulled out his phone. Jennifer leaned back with the expression of someone watching a building collapse. Lance started talking fast, defensive voice up half an octave. Something about miscommunication and workflow issues. The confident smile was completely gone. I pulled out my legal pad, flipped to pages with dates, timestamps, file names, 16 entries spanning 4 months. The CFO asked to see it. I handed it over without hesitation. Meeting ended 12 minutes later. Patricia asked everyone except Lance to leave. Wellington executives left without shaking hands. 2 hours later, legal sent company-wide email. Subject, litigation hold, Wellington Group engagement. Lance cleaned out his desk that afternoon. Quiet meeting with HR, supervised by IT, no handcuffs, no drama, just a career ending with the soft click of a closing door. 3 weeks later, Patricia called me into her office. First time I'd been invited to sit in one of her chairs. The senior director of risk assessment position is opening up, 47% increase plus equity. I accepted the promotion that Friday, started Monday in a corner office with actual windows. 2 weeks after that, in a courtroom that smelled like old carpet. The judge signed the papers. Permanent custody? Casey was officially mine. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table helping him with fractions again. He looked up from his homework and grinned. "Dad, you seem different lately. Happier?" "Yeah, buddy. Sometimes when you get the foundation right, everything else falls into place." He nodded and went back to his math, pencil moving in those same careful, methodical strokes. Some problems you solve step by step. Others, you just wait for them to solve themselves. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back, it's letting someone's own incompetence do the talking, while you document everything with the patience of a man who knows what really matters. 20 years taught me that in the end, people who steal credit are just borrowing time, and when the bill comes due, they never have enough to pay it back.